I want you to move from overwhelmed by information to confident in what really matters. I want to help you move from being unsure towards direction and purpose in your healthcare. I want to introduce you to health experts. I want to let you in on tough conversations on women's health. I want to give you a place where you can lean in and learn how to take care of yourself. Let's transform your health. Let's get clear on your goals. This is Women's Health Unplugged. I'm your host, Dr. Jordan Robertson, naturopathic doctor. I like money metaphors when we're talking about food. I think it can be quite a helpful comparison because we generally have a pretty decent idea about the ins and outs of our bank account, or if we've totally lost sight of what the ins and outs are of our bank account, we can see how that will land us into trouble. And yet we don't have the ability to do that in-out very well when we talk about food. Now, I hope you can hear, and by the way, welcome to Women's Health Unplugged. I hope you've heard over the last number of episodes our ability to straddle this conversation around weight and calories and body acceptance and diet culture and intuitive eating and we're going to talk a little bit about low calorie food choices today. So I hope that you can see how, from where I sit, I get to very pragmatically have all of these conversations. And yet I completely recognize that is always not possible for a listener to pragmatically sit in straddle the duality of these conversations around weight management and calories and disordered eating and intuitive eating and the joy of food and all of those pieces all at the exact same time, where that is something that I can do. And also in the position that I'm in, I am also able to hold most of these conversations out 6 feet in front of me and talk about them in a very, I'm going to say logical, but also very just pragmatic way. So if listening to this doesn't feel good, or if it feels like it's oppositional to some of the other things we've chatted about, I would invite you to try and listen in that discomfort and ask yourself why. But truly, if this doesn't feel like a good conversation for you, then I was going to say hang up, like we're talking on the phone. Hang up and come back on another episode where it feels like a good thing. And even when I've talked publicly about things like I'm a weight class athlete, right? So I compete in weightlifting. As a master's athlete, I compete in a weight class sport, and I don't walk around at my competition weight. I have to change my body weight, which mostly we do through manipulating water and electrolytes, but I don't walk around at my competition weight. And when I've posted about some of those processes online, some of the feedback I've even got is like, oh, Jordan, like, it's amazing that you can sit in that conversation so with such neutrality. And I will say that it's taken me a long time to get to that neutrality personally, but professionally, I can hang in the neutrality of the conversation around calories and weight management, etc. So massive preamble, but I want to talk about money, and I want to talk about food, because I think it's a great comparison, because we're going to talk about how to get food on sale. And I don't mean like getting discount peppers that are on the brink of going moldy. I'm talking about the moments and times in our nutrition where we maybe want to choose a lower calorie option, and give you some ideas on how to think about that maybe differently than you've thought of it before. And I truly do like the money comparison. I think that's a really easy way to look at it. Like if I said to you, hey, you got to save $5,000 by the end of this year, you would employ certain strategies, probably every day, every week, every month, and every quarter that helped you meet that goal, right? There would maybe be times where you would work a little harder, right? You'd work more hours or something to make more money. There would also be, some restraint, meaning that, I really want that dress, but I'm not going to get it because I don't need it. And I have a dress that's kind of similar. And then there's getting stuff on sale. And it's like, well, I need a dress, but I'm going to get this dress because it costs less. And I'm going to take the extra that I saved from that dress and I'm going to throw it towards that savings that I'm trying to make for the end of the year. And when we talk about low food calorie options, that's exactly what we're talking about. We're talking about getting food on sale, meaning that it costs less to have the food than it would if we got it full price. Now, there are moments, right? We can run this analogy, and I can take a metaphor like to its grave. There's going to be moments where that's not okay, right? You're like, but I really wanted the name brand dress, or the cheaper dress maybe falls apart after I've washed it twice, or it gets those little pills on it, like the fabric gets all little pilly, which I've watched so many videos on how to scrape those off with a razor, and it just doesn't work for me. But you may have moments in your life where the cheaper option, the on sale option, doesn't feel good, doesn't fit your needs, right? Maybe if you're going to a big event, that's not the time to get a budget dress for you. And you probably can think of lots of reasons and examples when the same analogy would play out with respect to food. I don't want to get my food on sale. I'm going to a party. I don't want to get my food on sale. I don't like the way it tastes when I get the low calorie option. I don't want to get my food on sale because it means that I can't eat what everybody else is eating, right? Those same principles kind of apply when we're talking about the nutrition options in some of these simple food swaps. There's going to be moments where it's not okay to choose I'm keep saying on sale, but I mean like low calorie. It's going to be moments where it's like not okay to pick those options for you. But, and you know what? It also may be totally okay if that is not your goal. If it's not your goal to save the money, then spend all your money on the dress, right? Like, don't worry about it. If that's not your goal, don't let someone else tell you that it needs to be your goal. Like I said, I can run this analogy forever. But let's just say that it is your goal, that you want to pay attention to your metabolism and that you have curiosity about weight management and what that looks like. I want to talk about how to get food on sale. I want to talk about some of these low calorie food options because I also think that in the health and wellness space, we've demonized a lot of these decisions, right? So when I will suggest to a patient that I'd like them to choose low fat dairy, I mean, first of all, they think I'm crazy that I'm such a big fan of the dairy in the first place. But then when I'm talking about the low fat option, they're like, but I thought that full fat was the best option. Or I thought low fat X was horrible for me. And let's remember that when we're making decisions about nutrition, I'm not saying eat low fat mayo as like 100% of your food source. Maybe there is something in there that we probably shouldn't eat in excess. Although I do probably eat it in excess. But we're talking about something that fits in an ecosystem with respect to your whole nutrition plan. I'm not talking about when I suggest that you do any of these things, catch yourself in those moments where you're taking this to an extremist point of view and say, you're saying I can never do this ever again. You're saying I always have to do this. You're saying this is never a good choice. The words never and always do not live in my vocabulary. I'm a scientist. Those are not things that we say. And so when you see those things online or where you see those things in other people or practitioners, you really need to call that into question because there is pretty much never, there's the word never, there's never a time where we would use the word never to describe something with respect to food. I mean, don't eat windshield washer fluid. That's maybe a never, but everything else should be on the table and needs to maybe has a season in your life and diet where it makes sense, maybe is going to become a staple and something that you do on rinse and repeat because the benefits outweigh the cons or the cost. So as you're listening to these options, because I am going to talk about a few things like Diet Coke, that you've probably heard some negative things about, I want you to think about this in context. We're trying to get some food on sale to help you feel freedom and flexibility and fun in your diet and meet your nutrition needs at the same time. I 100% think that that's an option. Okay, so let's talk about getting food on sale. See, I love my metaphor and I'm going to take it right to the end of this episode. So there's a couple of food groups that we're going to talk through and why and when you might choose a low calorie option and what that option might look like. I want to talk about dressings and oils. I want to talk about dairy. I want to talk about protein. I want to talk about dessert. Okay, these are the areas of your day in life that I think we can have the biggest impact on. You'll notice that I didn't mention your grains. I didn't mention fruits and vegetables. Those things just should be in your diet endemically. They are just things in your diet, and we're not looking to remove those things. We're not looking to get those things on sale or at a better deal than what they already are. They confer so much value and so much benefit that we're not going to adjust those ever. So again, if you think that you're avoiding carrots because of the sugar, or if someone's told you not to eat fruit because of the calories, like, we are missing the point. That is not what creates a healthy, ideal diet. Those other things I've suggested, though, have lots of wiggle room as far as what we can do with them. And they nutritionally don't change a lot when we modify them to have the lower calorie option. Whereas when we're looking at fruit, if someone says no fruit because of the calories, you're missing a lot. You're missing fiber. You're missing antioxidants. If I say choose chicken over beef because of the calories, you have the same amount of protein. You have the same amount of benefit. We're not losing something. The only thing you're losing is caloric intake, which is why I think this is such a good conversation, actually. I'm not taking an extremist view with this at all and saying don't have rice, right? We like the rice. We're keeping the rice. We're talking about modifying things in your diet where you're not losing any benefit of it. You're retaining the benefit and we're getting it on sale. Okay, the first food category we're going to talk about is like dressings, oils. Some of these are very calorically dense foods that often get added, right? They're not the main event. They're things that get added either in food preparation, like in the bottom of your frying pan, or they get added on top as like a dressing or something. Now, the research on this particular food group suggests that we are pretty disconnected to the caloric value of these foods, and we often underestimate how many of these foods are actually in our diet. If you've ever seen, there's some great memes floating around about like people crying and like there's so much melancholy, and everyone's like so sad when they find out what the actual serving size of peanut butter looks like. And this is what I'm talking about. So the serving size of calorically dense foods, I'm going to say dressings, olive oil. I'm going to throw avocado in there, nuts, nut butter. Okay. Very calorically dense, oil-based. The majority of the calories from these foods is coming from fat. The serving size of most of these things is going to be somewhere between a teaspoon and a tablespoon, depending on what we're talking about. And that visual, like, have you ever like looked at a teaspoon of water and just like poured it out into a bowl, or a tablespoon of oil and measured it out and then poured it out to see what it actually is? Visually, psychologically, we're very disconnected from the serving size of oils. And the challenge with this is that they are the most calorically dense foods that we eat, which means that by percentage, even if we're off by like 25%, right, which would not be hard, the difference between a tablespoon and 1 + 1/4 tablespoon visually is not very much food, right? You could look at it on your plate. It is still a pathetic amount of avocado on your plate. It doesn't look satisfying. It doesn't look like anything visually, and yet a 25% increase is significant if that 25% increase is happening every single time we serve ourselves one of these very calorically dense foods. And so there's lots of research on that this is like one of the macronutrients we're the most disconnected from with respect to what we think we're eating and what we're actually eating. So really important for us to have this conversation around how to get these foods on sale or how to think about them. So, the very first thing is honestly to measure them. There's some great research on how to help support patients who don't want to track their diet, who can't track their diet for various reasons, and yet we want to bring a level of awareness and mindfulness and serving size awareness to their nutrition. We actually literally just hand them measuring spoons. We don't make them write it down. We don't make them log it, right? We don't make them feel bad about overflowing the tablespoon. We just literally give them a tablespoon and say, this is what you serve your oils in. And it helps people get more grounded and connected to their calorie dense foods rather than this free flowing olive oil around the frying pan situation that happens for most people when they're cooking. Another great way to sort of reverse that is to put your usual amount of olive oil or butter in the pan for whatever you're going to make. And then once you've done that and visually you're like, yeah, that's how much I usually use, pour it out into a measuring container to see how much it is and see what that looks like in an actual measured amount. When I've had patients do that or try and get connected to that, they're amazed at, because, especially if they're cooking with like one partner, right? And there's like a quarter of a cup of olive oil floating around in the frying pan. To split that amongst two people when one of them is trying to get some food on sale, that's really not going to work that well for helping you meet your weight management goals. So the first thing around the oils is honestly just to measure it. And again, like I said, you do not need to write it down. You do not need to be micromanaging or getting obsessed with it. You just have to write it down. The other is to use a spray, right? Cooking oil sprays like olive oil sprays or avocado oil sprays are great ways to help keep the serving size of your oils in check with an even distribution around your frying pan without you adding too much to the actual overall caloric intake of the foods that you're eating. I just got brand new pans and I didn't really realize how crappy my pans were until I got new ones. This is not an ad, but I bought those like Our Place frying pans, and they have literally changed my life. They've also literally changed the amount of oil that needs to go in the bottom of the pan because they're so non-stick. They're ceramic. They're amazing. Again, not an ad, but I just thought I would share because I've had such good success with them. So measure and spray. But this is also one of the times where we can choose a lower calorie option for a lot of these choices to help bring the number of calories down, but let us keep the amount of moisture, the amount of dressing, the amount of joy that you might be deriving from these particular food choices. So I personally use a lot of low-fat mayo. I use low-calorie salad dressings because I like sauce. I like sauce so much that it was making a difference to my diet, especially when I'm getting ready for a competition. 100% I will get some of the more fancy mayonnaises. Is it mayonnaises? Fancy mayonnaise when I am not in a competition season. There's some really great like chipotle and lime and cilantro flavored mayonnaise that I quite like to have in the fridge, but they don't meet my needs when I need to be mindful about caloric intake, and I will choose a low-fat mayonnaise and low-fat salad dressing. So although I still recommend maybe measuring, especially if you have a specific goal and we're trying to be accountable to some of your nutrition, but when you choose a lower fat dressing, you actually have a lot more freedom around the amount that you use because by percentage, there's so many less calories of coming from fat in those low fat options that you can measure with your heart a little bit more and not be blowing your budget with respect to the foods that you're trying to take in. So I think those are great options. There are some, what we don't have is any low-fat nut butters. Like there's no low-fat peanut butter, no low-fat almond butter, but you can get dehydrated peanut butter powder. The dehydrated almond butter powder is gross in my opinion, but the dehydrated peanut butter powders can be a great way to maintain that peanut butter flavor, but again, helping you manage, and like I said, food on sale, the number of calories from fat coming from a dehydrated peanut butter product is almost zero. Whereas when we're looking at a tablespoon or more of peanut butter to meet your visual goals of a serving size, that it can make a big difference if we swap to a dehydrated peanut butter product. Avocado is the other one where I think we measure with our heart and soul more often than we realize. And really there's a really hard time replacing avocado with things. I would say that avocado, almond butter, those are ones that you maybe just have to measure and be mindful of your intake. Whereas those other low calorie food swaps are great options to help keep the serving size down. And again, remember when we're looking at your nutrition in a larger context, right? I'm not suggesting that you only eat mayonnaise. But when we look at what some of the other goals are for women, especially as they age, around increasing their protein intake, working on their fiber, working on their fruit and vegetable intake, for lots of people, this becomes more possible if we support them in choosing healthy dressing options, right? Like, I am not going to eat more chicken if I can't have more mayonnaise. Let's just be real. I'm not going to have more salad if I can't have more dressing. And so these are great ways to help meet our overall goal of improving overall nutrition without us, always increasing from a caloric perspective. And we've talked about this before when we look at various special interest groups like people in menopause, that often its serving sizes and food just goes up with age, partly because we're not feeling that great. And as we instruct people to eat more protein, they often just eat more of everything. But this would be one of those ways where we can increase your protein intake, say your chicken, but not increase the total calories by like a landslide, because we're replacing some of the dressings or sauces with a lower calorie option. Now, surprisingly, things like ketchup and barbecue sauce, mustard is 0 calories for mustard. That's always been a go-to in our family, to have like amazing mustards in the fridge. Every summer I'll go and buy like every unique mustard under the sun, because it's a great condiment addition that helps support a lot of the nutrition goals that people that I have, or that people in my household would have. But a lot of those other dressings, barbecue sauce, etc., those are majority carbohydrates. And so even a tablespoon of barbecue sauce is significantly less calories than a tablespoon of mayonnaise. And so as we start to think about how to get creative and how to minimize some of the repetitive habits that we have that are maybe pushing you into a state of overfueling, that helping people, say, cut their mayonnaise with mustard, right, on their burger, or cut their some of their dressings or some of their olive oil with a little bit of barbecue sauce. These are ways that we can help support this long change in behavior, so that we overall are putting a little bit more money in the bank with every meal. So that's the sort of dressings, oils. So measure it and then look for lower calorie options that are going to help meet your overall health needs. Number 2, I would say, would be, I'm going to say dairy, meat, and then protein. We're going to throw those all together, even though at the beginning of the episode, I kind of suggested that they were separate conversations. They're really not. That we can get protein, animal-based protein, whether that's dairy, poultry, red meat. And when we eat animal-based protein, invariably there is a fat component to it. So every single animal-based protein in its natural state is going to carry with it some fat calories, some cholesterol. And so when we look across the goals, right, for many patients, it's around supporting their protein intake. That has been taken in like such an extremist viewpoint online, where it's like eat only red meat, and now we've got the friggin' carnivore diet being talked about. That's taking it to an extreme, right? Where it's like now the protein and saturated fat is like 100% of someone's diet. I do not recommend. But every single time you're ingesting an animal-based product, you're going to have some fat calories from it. And remember, I'm not saying fat calories are bad. I'm just saying that they're the ones that we're the least connected to here, and the ones that are really the most expensive when we're talking about overall caloric intake. They are very satisfying, and sometimes we're going to choose a higher fat meat option because of that reason, right? It's nice and satiating, makes us feel good to have a higher fat option. Say like chicken thighs are a wicked choice, and sometimes better over a dry chicken breast. that now you have to put mayonnaise on, right? So you can see that like there's going to be moments where the higher fat option feels better or is more satiating or is meeting our needs better. But if we look across different types of protein, say we've got red meat on one side and then we have low fat dairy and protein powder on the other side, we're going from this massive spectrum of pretty much a 1-to-1 ratio in beef, where like for every gram of protein, you're getting a gram of fat. So if you eat a hamburger that's like a 30 grams of protein, there's 30 grams of fat, and most of that's saturated fat. Whereas if we look at chicken, it's more close to a 2-to-1 ratio, sometimes even a little bit less than that. But if we look at the chicken as a whole, 2 grams of protein, 1 gram of fat. And then when we look at dairy, depending on the percent fat in the dairy, we can get it as low as 0%, meaning that for 30 grams of protein, we're getting 0 grams of fat. So as we're looking at trying to, again, get food on sale, the farther you go down that spectrum and moving away from the higher saturated fat, higher fat, red meat based foods, and the closer we get towards poultry, turkey, low fat dairy, right? And even protein powder would be at the very end of that list. You can see calorically that you're getting more bang for your buck for the same amount of protein. Remember, that is not always going to be your goal. And sometimes that big, juicy hamburger is the goal. Sometimes the hamburger is the goal. And that is really great and totally okay. But if we're looking at foods that you rinse and repeat, if you took the 3 times a week red meat out and put in chicken instead, you're putting money in the bank at the end of the week. If we took the high fat dairy that you're eating and we replaced it with a low fat dairy, my guess is you feel exactly the same about it. It's very inconsistent in the literature. I was going to say it's actually very uncommon. That's the better word. It's uncommon in the literature that we find that high fat dairy is so much more satiating to people that they eat less overall. Right? Like that's what we're looking for. We're looking for a satiating effect. And if you eat high fat yogurt and you're like, oh my God, I'm so full, I'm not going to eat after dinner now, then maybe you're winning. But for most patients, if we replace their low fat dairy with if we replace their high fat dairy with low fat dairy, they feel exactly the same. There isn't this massive satiating effect. And all we've done is decrease the number of calories in the meal. And so you can see that choosing that protein option that is leaner, is going to give you bigger bang for your buck. It's going to allow you to bank some calories that either you get to spend on something else, right? So sometimes for me, I would be like chicken burger and plus avocado, right? Rather than beef burger. I'd rather chicken burger, cheese, avocado than a beef burger with nothing else on it. Or it's going to let you put some money in the bank. Right? And if your goal, again, is looking at weight management, every single time you make that decision, project that over a year, it's helping support your overall health goals. The last thing is to talk about dessert. And, it's funny because I posted on social media that I'm on Team Diet Coke, Team DC. And I got some weird responses back from that. And the non-nutritive sweetener, now the WHO has suggested that we don't use non-nutritive sweeteners. I would say that entire conversation is misguided at best. I'm not saying the WHO is wrong. I'm saying that it's misguided. Anytime we distill nutrition down to one ingredient, we've probably missed the point. There's more than one non-nutritive sweetener out there. So let's start there. There are many non-nutritive sweeteners. And so what I mean by non-nutritive sweetener is that it's 0 calories, right? So, the ones people often go to when they're thinking about non-nutritive sweeteners as being bad would be like aspartame, right? Which is what we have on Team Diet Coke is we drink aspartame. I've tried Coke Zero. It is not the same for me. So that aspartame is sort of like the OG non-nutritive sweetener. And if you think back to the 80s and 90s, the conversations around diabetes was often centered around using these non-nutritive sweeteners and aspartame. But there are other non-nutritive sweeteners like the sugar alcohols, like xylitol. There's other non-nutritive sweeteners like monk fruit sugar, which is 0 calories. It runs the same as sugar, meaning it runs out of the package. I'm imagining pouring it because I use this in baking. It's very expensive non-nutritive sweetener, but technically it's not aspartame and it's a non-nutritive sweetener. And then we have things like stevia, right, which doesn't behave that well in baking, etc. But technically, it will sweeten things, and things will taste sweet if we use stevia, and that is another non-nutritive sweetener. But generally, they get a bad reputation, and there's been a lot of discussion about whether or not it influences satiety in a negative way. So if I drink a Diet Coke, does my brain think I got a Coke and I didn't, and then makes me more hungry later? The general consensus on that research is no. And again, we like to really complicate and confuse nutrition so that we can sell shit to people. If you see, things online being discussed about how eating a non-nutritive sweetener is going to confuse your brain, it turns out that their brain is confused about how things work. So I think this conversation can be quite polarizing. And it's funny, I was telling one of the women in my office that we were tackling this as a podcast episode, and she was like, "Oh, Jordan, that is brave to talk about just even caloric intake and food swaps and low calorie food swaps." It's very polarizing because so much of what we do when we talk about nutrition is so extreme. And remember, I think I've said all the way along as we talked about every food category, like, I'm not saying you can never have a hamburger. I'm not saying that 100% of your diet is now, sweet and low, or that you need to micromanage your food. But I do think with each of those areas, we talked about oils, we talked about protein sources, we talked about treats, we can always be on the wrong side of that budget for years. And when we meet people in our office that say, they can't put their finger on something that's changed necessarily, but their health has moved in a direction that they're not happy with. Their weight has shifted. They feel like, the math isn't working essentially on their nutrition. But when we dive in deep, we end up just being on the wrong side of that budget all the time. They bought the designer dress at every single meal for 5 years, and they've run out of money, right? That's essentially the way that goes. And although I'm not saying that we always have to choose low-calorie food options, I'm not even saying you need to diet if it's not your goal. I'm saying we should be able to have the conversation about what does nutrition pattern look like for you? How do we help you, if this is your goal, save some money every time you have a meal and every time you're having rinse and repeat foods, I call them, like my low-fat mayonnaise. I eat enough mayonnaise that if I chose full-fat mayonnaise every single time, I would not meet my health goals. And so you want to, if this is your goal, be just on that side of saving. You want to put some money in the bank at the end of the week. And if that's not your interest, then at the very least, understanding what those food swaps can be can help you save up for the weekend where you want to go out for a nice big steak dinner with your partner. We all have those things that we get excited about and want to celebrate with. If you don't want those things to be a barrier in your pursuit of health, then we just save up for them like we save up for the designer dress. So hopefully that this conversation has felt safe and has given you some ideas and some food for thought on how to think about some of those patterns of nutrition and where you can see opportunity in what you do every single day. It's really unexciting to talk about nutrition because it is something we do a lot. We eat a lot, right? There's a lot of opportunities, which again means if we are overspending at every single meal and one of your health goals is to work on your blood sugar or maintain your body weight or lose some body weight, you're going to end up on the wrong side of that equation every single time. But giving yourself some tools that you can gravitate towards, every time you have this, I'm going to choose this mayonnaise, or every time I make a stir fry, I'm going to use a spray of olive oil rather than this free-flowing, third of a cup that I was putting in before, is that we just want to have some of those habits and behaviors built into your week-to-week nutrition. And those are things that when I think about my own personal nutrition pursuit, like when I graduated from naturopathic school 15 years ago, those foods were the devil, right? It was like, I can't pronounce half the things in mayonnaise, and so I'm never going to eat that. Or we had given this kind of halo effect, which is one of the biases or cognitive distortions that we give things that we think are really good, so we see it good in all lights, right? So, chia seeds are good, and so now they just can do no wrong. And yet, eating chia seeds 2 meals per day was really not meeting my health goals. And when I graduated, I did have this much more polarized view of nutrition where low-calorie food swaps was wrong. But not everybody's satiety is built off of the full-fat option, right? Maybe there is one person out there who makes like a avocado coconut keto balm that is about the size of my thumbnail, and they eat that and they go, oh my God, I'm so full. That was amazing. 100% of the time, I would rather eat a big bowl of popcorn, right? Same number of calories, different macronutrients, but visually way more fun, crunch-wise way more fun, taste-wise way more fun. And so we need to stop sort of giving the halo effect to certain health foods, because coconut oil eaten in your diet every single day is not getting anybody anywhere. And if the food choices that you're making are not giving you that satiety effect that you need to be well balanced and to feel calm and capable when you go to the fridge to make your dinner, then we need to back up and reverse engineer a strategy that actually does help you feel more confident about your nutrition. If you're eating foods on the regular, let's always just be on that one side of health, whatever that is for you. For some people, full-fat dairy makes them feel so full and satisfied. That's amazing. That's not how my brain works. And so I'm going to choose the lower fat option so that I can put more food in the bowl and add some things to it to, beef it up a little bit. So you got to look at your own pattern and look at it much more objectively. But even if you take some of the very small habits that we talked about today, there's some great research on handing people really cute, they actually gave them very cute little measuring spoons to measure their oils, and projected over the course of a year, those people actually had better blood sugar regulation as pre-diabetic patients and weight loss, because we said, if you're going to have olive oil, it's got to fit in this little spoon. That was it, right? They didn't tell them how many calories it was. They didn't even make them write it down. They just said, pour it in this cute little spoon, and that was it. So somehow, if your goal is to improve your blood sugar, reduce, let's say, your cholesterol, or improve your weight, if those are your goals, then we need to incorporate some daily health habits that are going to help you save a little bit somewhere in your nutrition plan. You need to get some foods on sale, and I'm an advocate of using low-calorie food swaps to help people get there. We eat often. It's helpful when you have some really easy go-to options that can help keep you more calorically in balance and help keep you on the path towards the goals that you have for yourself.
I hope you enjoyed that episode of Women's Health Unplugged. My goal is to help you feel more confident about your health. Please remember that what we talked about today in the podcast does not constitute medical advice, nor was a doctor-patient relationship formed. If you have questions about your healthcare or about how today's topic pertains to you, please take it up with your family doctor, your specialist, or someone on your health team.